Thanks everyone for joining us. This Financial Poise webinar, Turning an Idea into a Business, is part of the Startup Small Business Advisor 2025 series and is sponsored by Max Asset and the National Law Review. It's episode 4 of a 4-part series, so this is going to put a cherry on our startup seminars for 2025 Sunday. Slide 8 of the PowerPoint summarizes this episode, and slides 9 and 10 summarize the series. Speaking of slides, we're not going to step through the PowerPoint in any order, nor will you have to listen to us regurgitating the slides. This webinar, like all Financial Poise webinars, is an informal conversation on the topic. You can keep the PowerPoint handy, however, because we may indicate what slides the conversation is touching upon as we proceed. You could also take hard notes if you're old school and printed it out in hard copy. Our panelists are, and we're joined today by Gary Chodes. Gary serves as CEO of the National Law Review, a top 10 online legal and business news and information source with a 100-plus year history. He's a serial entrepreneur, having founded multiple successful legal tech, legal services, and online business lending services. Gary has experienced multiple successful exits for a number of the businesses to private equity firms, insurance companies, and publicly traded buyers. David Lopez Kurtz is with us today. David is a partner at Croak, Fairchild, Duarte, and Barris, which is a full-service firm located in Chicago and Milwaukee, where he focuses on emerging technology, including digital assets, blockchain technology, and artificial intelligence, large language models. David's practice also encompasses traditional corporate and securities matters, business formation, fundraising, mergers and acquisitions, and regulatory compliance. David Patulski is with us today. This is actually the first webinar I've ever done with David Patulski, so I'm excited. David is a senior partner at Gerhardt Law and a registered patent attorney and intellectual property attorney focusing on assisting inventors, creators, artists, startups, entrepreneurs, early stage companies, and emerging growth companies with their U.S. and international IP strategy, protection, enforcement, and monetization and capital raising. David frequently speaks and authors on emerging IP issues and technologies, and as a law professor, he teaches master-level students about IP, ethics, and other regulatory considerations. I'm your moderator, Robert London. I am a transactional attorney and partner at Jaspin Slester Narendran, which is a full-service law firm in Garden City, New York, just a stone's throw away from Manhattan. My practice as a transactional attorney goes from M&A to startups to executive compensation to financing, asset-based lending. Long story short, anything that's fun to negotiate and tough to draft and vice versa is what I do. We are very, very interesting people, but we appreciate that you're not spending your time and money to hear our infomercials. If you're really interested in us, you can check out our bios at the back of the deck. This webinar is a production of Financial Poise. More about Financial Poise can be found on slide 42 of the deck. If you're attending the live premiere of this webinar, you can submit questions using the web portal. If you're watching this on demand or listening to it on demand and have a question after the webinar, you can send an email to info@financialpoise.com. You could also check out our bios and reach us directly if you're so inclined. Remember, the PowerPoint conversation we're about to have are meant for general educational purposes and do not replace the need to consult with an attorney, an accountant, or other appropriate professional. In other words, if you take significant action based on something that you hear today and things don't work out, you can ignore our bios at the back of the deck. Once again, thank you to our sponsors, Max Asset and the National Law Review. Information about our sponsors is on slides 40 and 41 of the PowerPoint. All right, let's get the party started. Throughout this series and this discussion, we're going to chat about various early stage hurdles and concerns where the subject business model will be a quantum computing circuit maker. In past webinars and history through the years, I've taken something that's a little lower tech. This year, we decided to go a little more high tech for the basis of our conversations, just to round out the Financial Poise content library and to perhaps open up other considerations and avenues and topics of conversation. So I'm going to start with David Pozleski, David P, for purposes of this convo, since I've got two Davids today. I'm starting with you, David P. Can you describe a common pitfall made by an entrepreneur that you've experienced, and then I'll go to each of Gary and David in turn. And thanks everyone for
Wow.
joining us.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Financial Poise. Common pitfall. Wow, there's a lot to choose from, but I think I'll start with probably not being organized. What do I mean by that? I don't just mean like, from a kind of strategic point of view, but I also mean from a kind of legal point of view. So choosing the right entity, choosing the right team, making sure that everybody is equitized, there's proper agreements in place. Can't tell you how many founders have come with like, oh yeah, we have our standard founders agreement, but we're raising money and we don't have our entity set up. So something as simple as setting up an entity and having the organizational document, that's a big pitfall, especially if you're raising money. If you're raising money, of course, and you have to backtrack to kind of do all of that in order to kind of pitch yourself to an investor. That again, that doesn't look organized. So I think that's a common pitfall, thinking that they have time to organize, thinking they have time to get their legal agreements in place between founders. That's a common one. There's a lot more, but I think I'll stick with that one.
Okay, Gary, your turn.
Sure. Certainly, David hit the nail on the head. There's certainly many pitfalls. I would say one major one is just how long it might take before the cash burn stops. So I think you need to anticipate having to maybe raise more money than you thought, or more frequently, or earlier. And I would say the result of this, and I've seen this, a number of times, is that sometimes you have to abandon some of the plans that you may have had. Maybe they were too ambitious, but you may have to abandon them for reality's sake, or you may even need to pivot if the impact of the cash need is such that it forces you to think and redirect. But I will say that sometimes that pivot can be a real life lesson, and that pivot may in turn actually be the reason that you end up being successful. And that's happened to me, where the pressure of having the cash burn caused us to rethink our plans, and then the new plan was ended up being ultimately more successful.
Thanks. Actually, we might revisit that, go on a tangent a little bit later about what kind of pivots burn rate can result in. So I'm going to go to David Lopez Kurtz first, and then let's return to that before we dig a little deeper.
In terms of pitfalls, I think one that I see that always makes me cringe a little bit is when um, corners are cut, particularly on legal, because usually where I'm coming into the picture, in ways that aren't significant savings, but lead to significant costs down the road. So a founder knows that they're going to end up needing to be a corporation in Delaware, for example, but then they spin up an LLC in Wisconsin and do a whole bunch of work, and they end up needing to do some more intricate corporate finagling to get where they need to be. And in order to have saved, a few $100s, they end up spending or needing to spend many, many thousands later. And what I tell a founder beforehand when they're going into it is that, do what you have to do, 10 bar, get a paper route. The difference between doing things nicely at the very beginning and doing it in a way that's going to cost you a lot down the road isn't that significant. So do a little bit more in terms of capitalizing your future, and it'll pay off in the long run.
Great. So let's go backwards. Gary said something very interesting. So the founder has now come to the grips with maybe the burn rate is a little bit more aggressive uh, than they thought. What kind of pivot did that person make, or what kind of things happened that perhaps might be foreseeable the next time around?
Do you want me to pick up on that one as well, or do you want to
Yes,
toss it over
yes,
to David?
please. Yeah, like what
Uh,
what was the pivot, and what could we sort of spin out
well,
in
the
general advice?
one of the examples I was thinking of was it was an insurance related business, and we had two strategies to go to market. One was sort of either direct to the consumer or policyholder, and one was through agents. And it turned out that we were spending a lot of money on marketing to get customers directly, and that burn rate was pretty significant, and it was slow. And it turned out that the broker channel was moving faster, and it actually took us in a slightly different direction. It actually brought us more to like a high net worth market, which we weren't necessarily thinking about as much at the beginning. We sort of thought about that was a possibility, but that actually drove us to being really focused on the high net worth market because that's where the brokers were, and that ultimately, led to our success. If I went out, 3-4 years later, that ended up being a crucial move, but one that was a bit forced on us by by that burn rate of spending on the marketing and it not producing the results in the direct.
Okay, great. I'm not gonna take us too much off track anymore. Let's maybe get back. Let's go back to the basics and start with David Postolsky. Um, let's say our entrepreneur has a cool idea and thinks it's commercially viable. How does the product dictate the business's optimal path, including what you actually referred to in your pitfalls, corporate structure, and what kind of factors should be considered when deciding on entity form? You could also toss in a brief review of what the general entity forms might be available.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I probably have this conversation once a day with potential founders. I think the first thing I usually ask them when they're kind of considering, oh, I have this product, I want to bring it to market, I have this service, I want to bring it to market. Okay, first and foremost, are you raising money? That's a big thing. Are you going to be bootstrapping this? Are you going to be looking for investors? Because sometimes that dictates the actual entity that you're going to create. There's the traditional limited liability company, which is not that really attractive to investors depending on the product or service. And then, of course, there's the preferred, a closed corporation, a C Corp, or a traditional Inc., if you will. That's the more preferred. I'm sure we can debate that a little bit, but that's the more preferred entity for investor invest in. That's a big question that I'm usually asking is, what's your plan? What's your commercialization plan? Are you looking to get investment? And that might dictate the structure. And then just the other thing I'll say is also, what is the product or service? Is it something that will be that will need regulatory approval? From my perspective, from coming from a patent background and being a patent attorney, I usually kind of get into the regulations as to what the technology falls under, and that might dictate exactly what type of entity structure it might be. Maybe they're looking to limit their liability, maybe they're not. Again, it kind of all kind of goes together with their commercialization strategy is, but that's usually the two questions I'm asking them in terms of like, you have a product, and so what's the plan? What are you looking to do with this? You're looking to bootstrap it, raise money, and what type of product is it? What kind of technology is it? What kind of, is it based in science? It's gonna be regulated, things like that.
Great, thanks. We were talking a little bit about money before. We all know that time and money is needed to launch a successful startup. Gary, how critical is a written business plan uh, to raising money? Uh, should an entrepreneur hire someone at least to vet the numbers and or projections and derive projections in a business plan? What's best advice there?
I would say that having a written business plan is, I think it's critical for the founder to go through that exercise to crystallize his or her thinking. So I think that the main reason to do the business plan is for the founder. And if you have co-founders, then to have, for you to go through it together, because that way you can see where you agree or disagree. Uh, then when you're getting to the point of using that document for capital raising, there isn't any right or wrong way. I would say there are, people tend to look at slides, people are more visual than they used to be, but any of the formats are fine. Obviously, you can use ChatGPT to help you out. Now there's lots of tools to make it easier to gin up all different versions. I would say that it probably is worthwhile to also have uh, ChatGPT or equivalent, ask you a lot of tough questions. I think it can prepare you for the actual investor meeting. So I would say the plan, um, is most important for the founders, and then as a document to communicate your vision to the investors. It's pretty important.
That's pretty fascinating. I'm just thinking about it, which is, I mean, again, trying to resist going off topic because this is what every founder needs to know. And maybe in 2 years, a founder would need to know this, but it's an interesting concept, which is, hey, Chat GPT, here's my executive summary. Here's a current balance sheet. Here's my projections. Please ask me 6 questions that I'm going to need to master to raise, to raise capital. Wow. Hmm. That's pretty cool. Um, okay. Let's stay back on topic because advisors are needed, and I'm going to ask David Lopez Kurtz as to uh, what are the typical advisors who should be tapped, or at least be considered in the initial stages of both starting a company and percolating it.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on industry, but if we're going to go to our our quantum computing chip example company, I mean, presumably you want an advisor who knows something about quantum computing. Relevant industry expertise is going to be really, really powerful. And so whether it was one of the co-founders prior PhD supervisors, somebody who can speak to what you're building, and then building that network of professional service providers who work with early stage companies. The practice of law is broad. There are lots of different lawyers, and we focus on different kinds of clients. And there are lawyers who work with early stage companies and who are going to be willing to talk to you and be in your corner and get to know you, and then step in when it's time for them to start to do the work. And so beginning to have those conversations, beginning to get to know, the accountants, the lawyers, the folks that you're going to need as your business is established and then grows and matures, while also building the relationships with the, technical business specific advisors that relate to the thing that you're building. It's gonna pay off, and it's always time well spent.
In your view, is it best to, let's put it aside, and this will make us all sad, put aside the lawyers, put aside the accountants for now. Let's talk about the others. Is it better to hire them as consultants to bring them on board as employees, or for the big macro thinkers, put them on an advisory board and give them a little slice of equity? What do you see out there? What would be the approach that maybe you would take if you were one of our founding fathers or founding persons on our startup?
Well, for starting with me, I hate to continue to be too much of a lawyer about it, but it does. It depends. And it, if you are looking to move in a way that is narrow and deep, that is fast, I think that's usually somebody that you're looking to pay cash in the short term. You say, I need this expertise in order to help me get past this specific challenge over the next 6 months, say. That's likely going to be somebody that you're contracting to come in and provide that expertise in a short-term concerted way. On a more long-term basis, say going back to the example about the PhD advisor, that might be somebody that you want to be able to do right by having that consistent resource of checking in with them, every other week or once a month for a few hours here or there. And you feel that maintaining that consideration for that investment on their part is fair and presents credibility to your project. That's where I think that having some kind of advisory equity grant or option grant can be really, really effective, and a well structured and maintained advisory board. And I will probably get into the distinction between your board of advisors and your board of directors, but a well structured and maintained and curated and leveraged advisory board can be a really powerful asset.
Great. So that's at the macro advisory level. Let's tap David Postolsky as to uh, the staffing needs and the rank and file of the workers. Let's keep it at the corporate level. Let's assume these are not people in a clean room putting chips in places on, on an assembly line, but marketing and accounting and financial controls, are those people best as hires? Are they best as consultants? Um, Payroll versus consulting payments. What's your feeling there, David?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're talking about early stage companies, nobody has cash at that point. So you really got to try to find people that share your vision, share your passion, want to share in your journey. So it probably means that you're bringing them on with some sort of vested equity schedule. Maybe you have a little cash to throw to them, but they're going to be on your team for, 3 to 5 years on some sort of vesting schedule, meeting certain metrics. And that includes everyone that you just said, your chief marketing officer, your chief technology officer, your chief science officer, whatever it is. That's usually what I see. Very few people have cash, kind of very few early stage companies have the cash to pay, let alone themselves, than actual like C-suite people. But that works. That actually works. That whole, kind of vested equity scheduling, consultants, if you will. That works really, really well, and it keeps everyone interested and passionate, and working towards the same goal. But I think the hardest part is just finding those people who are aligned with your similar passions. Because if they're not, then it's probably not going to last.
Okay, David and or Gary, do you want to throw on top of that as well? Anything about, if we hire a payroll specialist, maybe we talk a little bit about equity plans, how much to reserve for equity, then we'll move on from paying our workforce. If not, I could just bump us along as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say that um, these days you might be able to again make do with fewer programmers just because you can leverage AI early. And they use this term vibe coding. I don't know if that's reality, but it does seem that you can. In older days, you were spending a lot of money on people who could write code early, and those people are expensive, and maybe you can do it with a little less. So that's actually kind of a big benefit to the
Mhm.
startup.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'll just say that when it comes, and this is a pretty frequent question, is how much of my overall capitalization should I think about setting aside for the incentivization of employees? And it depends. It depends on industry. It depends on expectations. It depends on how well capitalized you are, how much you're paying in cash versus giving future upside and equity. But I think anything between say 10 and 25% of the initial cap table is something that I'm not going to push back on too far. If it's, we're giving, if you have half the company allocated for that, I might wonder why. And if it's 3%, I might also wonder why, and we have a conversation to sort through it. But there is a lot of flexibility, and it comes down to some of the stuff was talked about earlier in terms of business planning. This is one of the pieces of the business plan. How are you growing the team? Who do you need to be on the team? How are you going to incentivize people on that team? What's market compensation for the best people? Do you need the best people, or can you find an okay person to meet that need at a more reasonable rate? These are all things to think through as the entrepreneur, and that's one piece that you can bring to the table to incentivize those folks and bring them in.
Okay. Well, we have an entrepreneur here on the panel, Gary. Um, let's talk about what those basic roles are and what those slots are that we feel that we need to fill to sort of roll out our team.
Well, in the case of this quantum computer maker, that's obviously the chip maker. You're going to have very particular needs. You might need like people in material science and physics. That's not most startups, or at least not most startups I'm dealing with. So that's going to be germane in a real scientific endeavor. Um, I would say with most startups, you're going to need people with some computer science programming background because there's probably some interface with the world. But again, maybe you can leverage more technology and fewer people. Salespeople are going to be important, but maybe later on with quantum, there may not be sales at the beginning, so maybe you can save that money. People do refer to these chief innovation officers and AI officers. So you certainly see that in legal tech companies. You see, who's the chief innovation officer. Uh, so I'd say those are the types. You know, depending if somebody in the founding team has some financial acumen, then maybe you don't need anybody that looks like a CFO. And if you don't have anybody with that background, maybe you seek out that type to add.
Okay. David Patulski, if someone says they'll work for less cash but wants equity, is it flatter because they must believe in the business? Let's say that's the case. Is it a good idea to save money when you're just starting out? How do you, at the initial stages, look at cash versus equity? Let's say, you maybe have some angel money, some seed money. Um, when do you start really figuring in how you want to pay these people versus giving them a stake, and how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a tough question at the end of the day. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer here. It kind of depends on the journey. If you have some angel investment, my particular preference is that you probably dump that into some sort of intellectual property. Call me biased at the end of the day, especially when we're talking about quantum computing. I have a computer science background, so you probably want to get some sort of like intellectual property. And so if that comes at the expense of not paying someone fully but giving them some sort of hybrid, a little equity, that's probably what I would recommend. But again, I'm not necessarily the business advisor to these startups. I'm just kind of trying to tell them what I think they should be spending their money on that might come back, that might cause them to get further investments in the future. And so from my perspective, that's usually intellectual property. But then again, if we're talking about, paying the person that you're talking about, and that person is the computer scientist or the technology person on your team, well then yeah, throw the cash at him. So if he's gonna create the tech, and that tech's gonna hopefully get you more money, and hopefully you also would have protected it through IP, then yeah, throw the money. So it kind of depends on who, again, famous lawyer answer, it kind of depends on who the person is that you want to be throwing cash at when you might be, low on cash.
Okay, fair enough. We hinted a little bit about an advisory board before. Um, and we've also talked about traditional personnel. Um, let's focus on the advisory board now, Gary. Who serves on that? Who are these people? How is it different from a board of directors? And we can all sort of chime in uh, after you take first crack at it.
Yeah, I would say, again, there's no right or wrong answer. I would say sometimes you'll have an angel investor sit on an advisory board. I would say it's good to have somebody who has been at a startup, not just like somebody who's only been at a big company. And then I guess lastly, I would say you don't need to have an advisory board. I mean, it sounds good, but sometimes like you think, oh, I wish I had one, but then, you don't end up missing it. So, but I'd love to hear what everybody else has to say.
I mean, I could chime in. I mean, for the advisory boards that I've seen, these are people who can lend top level let's call it steering advice, and maybe have some contacts, but who are not really going to be committed or devoted to your day-to-day business, who are not going to be around, but maybe once a quarter you can get on, a brainstorming session with that person and others. Um, and maybe there's someone on that advisory board who knows a lot about marketing, and maybe there's someone there who knows a lot about overseas production, just general guidance. And for that, maybe they get a small slice of equity in it, in exchange for an agreement to make themselves available a couple of hours a month for an advisory board meeting. I mean, that's where I've seen it. Um, anyone else see anything different or similar, or is it just me?
No, I was just gonna add, I've seen large advisory boards like, oh, we have like 30 people on it. We have this person here and that person there. And I'm not so sure that's the way to go. Having like cachet advisory board members that do absolutely nothing and that have just agreed to appear on your website is not really helping you in any way. But to your point, if you have those advisors, maybe those select few that actually can steer, can advise, can participate, even if it's a little bit, and it's not just, the gold plaque on the website, that's better. I think investors, they're not dumb. Like they know that they know whether your advisory board member is really actively involved or even tangentially involved. Again, tangential is good in this situation, right? It's the ones that are just like, oh yeah, I'm on the advisory board of like 15,000 startups. Okay, thanks. That means nothing, to anybody. So yeah, less is more, I think, when it comes to advisory boards.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree. Like I think that like the name drop method of doing it it'll get you through the analyst at the bottom of the food chain when you're dealing with VCs, right? Like that brand new undergrad who's like, oh man, I found this company and on their advisory board is insert exciting person here, and they kick it up the chain and they found the best new thing. And then, any senior investor is going to immediately poke at that, and be like, when's the last time you talked to that person? It's like, oh, well, it falls apart really, really quickly. So as with anything, building it in a way that is earnest and honest when it comes to the nature and extent of your relationships. If you have people that are providing you advice that you are engaging with in a regular uh, sort of cadence where it makes sense, it feels right that they should have a value alignment with you. To my mind, that should be the indicator that you have advisors that maybe work together as part of this board. If it's just somebody you met one time at a happy hour and got a selfie with, like that's not enough. Like, and certainly don't include anybody who doesn't know they're going to be on there. I've had that happen to me before, where I found myself on listed as an advisor to a company where I'm like, I don't even know who you are. Why is my name on there? It's crazy. So don't do that. That's a bad look.
Wow. That's pretty interesting. With no indemnity agreement or equity too, and there you are.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to stick with David Lopez Kurtz. Following COVID, remote work from home is pretty prevalent. And I think these days, even they're seeing a bit more of a shift back to people have to be physically present. There's probably half a generation of a workforce out there that insists on some sort of remote work from home. To be able to hire that kind of talent, because presumably now we're in high tech and there aren't people who are gifted and can really add value, but will insist on some sort of hybrid. I'll ask David what kind of protection and what kind of documents will that are now needed in the suite of documentation for an employer to go ahead and attract that kind of talent and to protect itself.
It really highlights the need for technical security. Your IT becomes it's already important when you have an office space and the computers in there. So it's not that that's not important. That's still important. It's just especially important when you might have somebody working in a cafe in San Sebastian somewhere, and like it just amplifies all of those needs. And what I would tell founders is, because sometimes founders get really excited about these remote teams and people that are working overseas, and they think that they can get clever when it comes to the categorization of people as contractors, and like, oh, we're going to save this money. No, you're going to spend it somewhere else, because at the end of the day, if you're trying to build something of value that is investable, you're going to need to address these different things head on. And it's going to be multi-jurisdictional. And it means you're going to need to get reputable service providers to help facilitate your payroll, to facilitate your compliance. Because even when it comes to going to lawyers, as much as we like to say we have the answers to everything, in something like employment, if you go to somebody and they have employees in 17 different states and 40, different countries around the world, there's hardly a law firm in the world that can handle all of those things at once. Now, there are payroll service providers who can help you with that. It makes it really expensive. It adds a really significant additional cost to maintaining and growing your workforce. But I will say that the thing, if I'm going to point at one thing when it comes to maintaining a remote workforce, is getting very strong IT security policies and procedures in place early, refreshing them often, and just knowing that that's going to be a critical part of your overall human resource infrastructure.
Thanks. I mean, that's great. I think it's also part of it is trying to figure out a plan to impart the Starbucks, the common sense, which is it is not okay to work out in public, right? Like if you're going to be hybrid, you need a secure place that's not our office or the plant, but you need a secure space to work and you need a secure connection and it has to be set up in a way like common sense things that people only realize like when it's too late, like when I'm playing golf and I realize how smart I am, you know, after I missed a shot. You know, you're really smart after you make the mistake. So there's a lot of common sense that has to go into setting up, attracting these people, letting them work from home or work remotely. That you just need to impart that it's not about signing documents and it's not about, a work for hire agreement and confidentiality and having IT, vet their keyboard and their laptop. It's really like, hey, you need to you need to be aware on a constant vigilant basis. Um, all right, so that's a lot enough about our workforce and attracting talent and compensating them. Uh, let's go back to the money, and I'll stick with Gary. Let's chat about what does an angel investor look for if they're deciding about making an early round investment in a startup. Let's say that they've seen the executive summary and it kind of looks cool. What's the next level of inquiry that they're going to want answers for?
I mean, I would say that angel investors kind of come in all flavors. I think they have different motivations to invest, and I don't even know if there's a clear definition of what an angel is other than they're, earlier and less formal than a VC. So there are, there are definitely lots of them, and they're definitely are they put, they're active, so that's good. And they probably can be your friend earlier, than a VC would, who are going to require things to be further along. Um, they're probably going to want to make, 5 times their money or more, but some may not. They're going to want to see your, we talked about it before, track record. They're going to want to see that the team, at least somebody on the team has been through a startup or startup environment, has had some success. Uh, and I would say, if they look at the background of the team and they can get excited about the topic, it's possible that might be enough, at the very early stages, that some person who is in theory an angel, might like it. And then other angels might go, my God, I'd never do that. So, that's my 2 cents.
You're on mute, Robert.
There we go.
There we go. It was a little. My quantum chip wasn't processing quite as well as I'd hoped, or maybe it was my finger. It was probably my finger. Uh, Gary, you said 5x, but I think there's a distinction there. It's not, hey, am I going to make 5x? I think it's a little different, which is I recognize I make nothing. I may make nothing, but if I need to make at least 5x, right? I mean, everyone knows that there's a binary hit rate. It's either it hits or it doesn't. But if it hits, I don't want, 1.25 back. I want multiples. And I think that's something that entrepreneurs need to understand when they're looking at their projections and they're looking at their exits. An exit 5 years from now at maybe 2x is not going to whet anyone's appetite.
Yeah,
Um,
not at that very early stage where it's so risky, and most of them are going to probably just fail, and you'll lose all your money. So you're exactly right. That 5x is, let's say it's some sort of an average
mhm.
over the winners and the losers. But the flip side is that the angels are coming in at the riskiest stage, and they might be all over the place and have varying motivations as to why they're investing. So the structures could be all over the place.
Okay. David Lopez Kurtz. We talked a little bit about the differences in advisory board and boards of directors. We'll talk a little bit maybe later about what a board of directors does, but I think every entrepreneur is familiar with a board of directors. The question is, who's on the board of the directors? Is it the founders? Is it family members? Is it, what should a typical board composition look like? And putting aside the concept of an advisory board.
It evolves over time. If as a company is being formed, if it has multiple founders, I might expect to see the founders comprise the board. Um, Through early investment, say your pre-seed or seed level round, I might see that again be consistent. It might be maybe you add a board observer from whoever led one of those rounds at the seed level, so that somebody who sits in board meetings and can participate in conversation and has access to the full information, but is not a voting member of the board. But by the time you reach your first priced round, your Series A, you should expect that there will be somebody representing that preferred class of shareholders, and that's usually the lead investor on the A. That would be a common ask and pretty typical to see. And as you progress through your growth thereafter, there would be further recompositioning of the board where you'll start seeing fewer and fewer members, founders, and ultimately you might have a CEO seat on the board where your CEO is on the board, but your CEO might not be a founder anymore. Depending where you are in the company's life cycle, that might no longer be the case. But early on, not at all unreasonable for it to all be the founders, and you're going to see increased investor presence as the company matures.
Great. I think I'm going to get off the boards for a while, and I'm going to collapse a couple of things that I wanted to talk about into one topic with David Postolsky. Um, let's talk basic corporate governance, which is what are the types of issues that kind of need to be tackled? How are they tackled? How does our initial stage company protect itself? What does it need document wise with its workforce? What's sort of the very basic suite of documents that are needed at the early stages of the company?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about multiple founders and we're talking about a limited liability company, you can't do anything without the operating agreement. That's like a must and highly negotiated document, and it should not, it has to be done pretty early. If you're a single member LLC, whatever, you don't need it. But at the moment you have one additional partner, if you will, you need an operating agreement. On the closed corporation side, the classic Inc., if you will, I mean, at the very least, you need your shareholders agreement, your bylaws, your restricted stock purchase agreement for those founders that are probably on some sort of vested equity schedule. You need some sort of like IP assignment agreement. That's a must, and that should not go. Again, I'm not just talking. Yes, I'm an IP attorney, but it's a must to have some sort of agreement that says that all founders that are working for us, all of their intellectual property is owned by the company. So that's a must as well. And maybe sometimes I see some sort of like indemnification agreement also that's kind of throw into that suite. Yeah, so maybe about four or five of those documents, but any one of those that is not going to be kind of created at that onset. Again, scrambling to create these documents when you're raising money and investors are going through due diligence and want to see your documentation and you don't have any of this and you have to get it all together pretty quickly. That's not a good look. And so to David's point up front, spend a little bit up front, get these documents in place so that you don't have to worry about scrambling later. Again, it's all part of that initial comment I said, just being organized. This is the way to organize yourself with those suites of documents.
And needing to do it fast to piggyback on that a little bit, when you have founders find themselves in that situation where you're just so unprepared,
Yeah.
your lawyers then are going to say, we need to get this fixed and we need to get it fixed now. And I tell founders all the time, like, you can have things done right, you can have them done fast, you can have them done cheap, but you can only have two, and doing it right is non-negotiable. So now you need to have it done fast and for more cost, because oftentimes in my personal case, ideally I have the opportunity to push work down to an associate or to a paralegal or to someone that can help maximize value for the founder. If we need things done today and we need it done perfectly without additional review, it means I'm going to do it myself or one of my partners going to do it directly. And then you're going to be paying our full partner billable rate rather than allowing us to manage the matter in a way that we could have if we had a little bit of additional lead time to know that we need to get things cleaned up to be prepared for investor review.
You're on.
One question for the group, and that was on me, that was not technology. For the group, we talked about intellectual property assignment. Is there a difference in your point of view? And how often do you see this, which is you have a founder that says, I'm not going to assign all the IP to the company, but hey, I'm going to go ahead and license it. What's the difference? What should, a founder know about both legally what the difference is and what the perception is to outside investors, where you're looking at a company that has some sort of license to the IP as opposed to actually owning it?
Yeah, I guess I can start on that. From most of the investors that I work with in any level, angels, VCs, private equity, I'm not saying they don't want to invest in licensed IP. Of course, that's a thing, but at the end of the day, they want to invest in the entity that owns the IP. And in that scenario, where you have an IP assignment from the onset, the company owns it. When you have a founder that's standing their ground, and again, the founder could be a university. That's why it's a little bit, sometimes it could be a different situation. But if it's a solo founder and they're standing on principle, and I'm going to own the IP and I'm going to license it to the company that you're going to invest in, it's not real ownership, right? It's not. It could be a worldwide license, perpetual license, all of that. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of power that comes with the asset being owned by the company as opposed to the asset being owned by the founder. And then when you take into consideration who has to defend the intellectual property, who's gonna make certain decisions about the intellectual property in a license agreement, if those things are not negotiated, it's possible that all these residual rights that are still in the principled founder is not really maximizing the investor's investment at that point. So I've seen it. I've seen it done that way, but again, it's usually not a single founder that's saying I'm gonna have the IP and I'm gonna license to a company. If it's a university, like some sort of tech transfer, that's a different situation, a much better situation, because it's a university, that owns it. So there's some guarantee there, as opposed to this founder that may not understand even what he's trying to do.
I guess it also makes a difference for down the road for financing, which is that license probably doesn't serve much comfort on a hard money loan as borrowing base.
Right. That's right
So
too.
that's another reason why you should look at that difference as well. Borrowing base, that means money. So let's talk money, Gary. Let's tell our listeners and viewers what the differences are in available pots of startup capital and how they're different and what the pros are and the cons are of each.
Sure. I'd say, simply, that idea of friends and family at the very beginning, that's often it's going to be available. And I would say that, it's always hard to ask friends and family for money. On the other hand, it's probably the most flexible money you're going to ever get. So then we talked about angels a little bit with all the different flavors. So they may come next. Maybe they have bigger checks. There are these, they're not available everywhere, but for, tech endeavors, there are these accelerators like a Y Combinator. Sometimes those are a good idea. They put you through like a boot camp. I think they help vet the idea a little bit. They might help you with getting that seed or series A, but most companies don't go that route, but I would say that's an option. And then of course, the true venture capitalists, they're interested in certain kinds of companies. They have their own inclinations in terms of, some are going to do true science, some are going to do e-commerce, some are going to do retail. But generally, they're not going to come in until you've already gone through had some success, already had some money in, and then they're also going to require more, and they're going to typically they're going to set the terms. So, or, help establish the terms. You're not going to generally be able to dictate unless you're, um, you have something that's so unique and people are, competing, going crazy to get into your deal. I mean, that's, often a fantasy. I mean, usually it's the other way around. You have to convince them, and usually you get a lot of turndowns, and then, the ones that are interested, they're going to be able to dictate the terms, and maybe you may not like all the terms.
Okay, let's stick with startup capital. David Lopez Kurtz, I've heard of this. It's no longer new, but it is newer than a convertible bridge note. Um, what's a safe agreement, and what's the difference between that and a bridge note? What do each of them kind of do? And then after that, let's have a brief chat about what a revenue share agreement is, if anyone out there has had any experience with that.
So the SAFE, or the simple agreement for future equity, was promulgated by the Y Combinator, who was just mentioned as an example of an accelerator. So it was Y Combo had companies going through their program, and they wanted to streamline what they saw as an inefficiency in particularly pre-revenue, early stage technology companies getting funding at a point where it's difficult to settle on a valuation. And so everyone knew that you should be using, or ought to be using, and we're often using, these convertible instruments, usually convertible notes, but these were bespoke documents. Every lawyer, every VC, everyone had their own form. And so there was a lot of negotiation that went on. And so the thought was, we're going to create this market standard document that serves this purpose of getting upside for the investor there, in a way that's risk mitigated between investor and company. Now, whether they have successfully done that is a matter of great debate. There are angel groups and certain investors who won't invest on safes at all, and there are other VCs who will only invest on safes and are very comfortable with them. So there's a range of thoughts on them. The one note that I will have for folks is, there is a thought among, don't over focus on the simple word. It's a short agreement for future equity. It is not a simple agreement at all. The implications of this convertible instrument are very complicated, and I strongly recommend, with early stage founders, prior to beginning their raise, call me. I mean, if you want, like, I'm happy to talk to founders and find somebody, a lawyer, a VC, somebody who you know and who isn't about to invest in you, to take you to coffee and talk about how this convertible instrument works, because you can tell when someone hasn't done that, when they talk about how they raised at an XYZ valuation on a safe. That's not how safes work. I already know that you don't know what you're talking about, and that's really dangerous, because you are signing a very important document that you don't fully understand, and you're negotiating terms on a deal that you don't understand. And so find a resource that will give you the information you need to come into this informed. So that's whenever we talk about safes, I'm just like, oh man, like I'm not a safe hater. Like some of my fellow angel investors in the angel group that I'm in, who do hate safes. I'm not amongst them, but I am a securities lawyer by trade and training, and I've just seen too many founders end up all backwards because of this document, when a short conversation really could have saved them a lot of pain.
A question for you on the safe, which is, I know note has a maturity date and it will be paid sometime. Let's say our startup has valuable IP because the founders contributed it to the capital. Okay. And so now I give $1 million by way of safe, and the company never engages in a financing for whatever reason. It doesn't get legs, but it has valuable IP. Do I get my money back in a safe? Does a safe provide for repayment of my money and dissolution? Does that have to be included? Can it be kind of like a note as far as maturity goes in some regard?
The base document does not contemplate that. And that's one of the areas of risk disconnect for certain investors, is that they want or need, based on their own governing documents, their own risk tolerance, to have that outside date. So if you are an investor, or if you're a founder who's interacting with an investor, who needs that or wants that, is negotiating that, it's typically, I recommend handling it outside of the document, the model document, and putting that in a side letter. If you want, even if you want to make that term across the round. Maybe then there'd be a reason to adjust from the form document if it's just a universal term. But generally speaking, that's another note on safes is don't use custom safes. Like the document is short, which means that it assumes that the rest of the document works in a certain way. So once you start, when you have a small, finely tuned machine like a watch and you move one piece, the whole thing gets goofy. So to the extent you need to adjust or add something, put it to the side. But that's how you would handle that. You'd put that in the side letter and you'd say that there's a 36-month horizon and that if the instrument is not converted at that point, it will convert either at its conversion cap would be really common if this is a capped safe, or at a valuation to be determined at the time if you have a discounted safe, or you can set a valuation in the side letter that will be used for that conversion.
Okay, I'm going to try to bring us home now in our last couple minutes. We started our conversation, fireside chat, with what's the pitfall? Okay, so let's avoid the pitfalls. And rather than saying, as your topic here, don't say avoid the pitfall. Each of you, and I'll start with Gary, one lesson learned that we could share, or is the best piece of advice that you would give to a client or an advisee or a co-founder, let's say.
Well, I would say these days, I would just make a note that AI can be both a blessing and a curse. I mean, I think that leaning into the AI could do a lot of things for you. It could help you define your market. It could help you achieve actual success. It might get you more capital and better multiples. So there's a lot of positives for leaning into this AI age we're in. And you may, as I mentioned before, you may actually save money on the programming. On computer science types who are going to do programming later on. But the other side of that, I guess, is um, the fact that there could be copycats more quickly, more of them, and perhaps also there just could be more confusion, meaning there could be more AI that creates more things that are like what you do, and maybe they're not even what you are, but there may be enough that create enough confusion in the market that it makes it difficult for people to distinguish you from them. So, I'd say again, blessing and curse, but I'd say mostly blessing.
Okay, David Postolsky.
I would say from from in my world, I think having some sort of intellectual property strategy up front is really key. It's not just about patents, it's about trademarks, it's about copyright, it's about trade secret. But having something like doing some sort of like due diligence or search. I mean, most of the potential clients that come into my office, all it took was a simple search for us to realize, like there's something already out there that's very similar. Again, from a patent, trademark, or copyright perspective. And so that's not the end of the story. Sometimes it's the beginning of the story. Right now, that's your chance to pivot, in Gary's words, right? At the end of the day, or try to determine how you can be different from what's already out there. But just like throwing all caution to the wind and like just doing everything, building, prototyping, this, that, and the other thing, and not having an understanding of the intellectual property strategy and potential competitors that are out there, that's a big, big, big mistake. And I think people need to kind of get on that pretty quickly, as early as they possibly can.
Okay, David Lopez Kurtz, bring us home, baby.
I'll bring it back to one of the things I said with the in the pitfalls. There's some low-hanging fruit that you can pick as an entrepreneur. There is one of the really sweet things about the growth of the Y Combinators and startup culture, and there are frustrating things we don't like, but one of the great things is that there are really, really strong resources, and there are really, really strong practitioners who work in the space, and there are really, really strong entry points to building a company in a way that protects this upside and lets you focus on building, take a little bit of time, save a little bit of money, and do it right the first time. If it was an idea worth pursuing, it was an idea worth protecting. So talk to David, talk to somebody when you have that opportunity, and yeah, good luck out there.
All right, well, this was another fun one. Thanks everyone for joining another entertaining yet educational production of Financial Poise. Look for Financial Poise webinars wherever better continuing education webinars are sold. This concludes the Startup Small Business Advisor 2025 series. You can look for the first 3 episodes in Financial Poise's content library. I will be back with the Financial Poise as moderator in the 5-part 2025 private M&A bootcamp series. So if you have been excited about everything you experienced today, I can tell you how much incredible fun M&A is. Until then, stay safe, stay well, and make sure to reach out to professionals and advisors like Gary, David, and David. See ya. Stay well. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.